For staying with us. Now, the Federal Executive Council has approved two major electrification projects worth over 213 billion naira to boost energy access in Nigeria's universities, teaching hospitals, and rural communities. Minister of Power Adebayo Adelabu disclosed this after the 7th FEC meeting chaired by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at the State House, Abuja. The first project, valued at 145 billion naira, including VAT, covers engineering, procurement, and construction of power systems under the Energizing Education Program, managed by the Rural Electrification Agency. It's funded through the Renewed Hope Infrastructure Development Fund. The project aims to be completed within 7 to 9 months. Its goal, to provide stable, renewable electricity to public universities and tertiary teaching hospitals, cutting their energy costs and boosting learning and research nationwide. Our director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Sam Amadi, joins me live via Zoom for more on this. Good to have you join us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I mean, this is a new development within the sector where you were, just until recently a key player. You were at the helm of affairs, at NEC. What do you make of this now? The government is shifting towards renewable energy for tertiary institutions and government-owned hospitals?
Well, it is an admission that it will take some time to properly put our national grid in order. And in the meantime, we can provide off-grid and somewhat isolated grid infrastructure to support critical development needs like education. So we know that for a very long time, we'll be struggling with stability of the grid. And so no matter how much you try this, there's going to be some years gap before we begin to see, hopefully, significant improvement and stability. In the meantime, government also has a policy around renewable energy, the deployment of renewable energy, and the best place to deploy it will be off-grid for now. And so this is a good idea because it basically supports tertiary institutions with available power, reliable power, off-grid in some sense. And then, they also have the national grid. But again, this will supplement. And this is important because if you look at research institutions in the country, part of the crisis they have is they don't have steady supply of electricity. And this impedes research work, scholarship, and the contribution of this sector to national economy in an age of innovation, which is driven largely by knowledge. Knowledge production is at the heart of economic growth. And so one would think that emergency intervention, short-term intervention, would be to provide off-grid solution to these critical national assets while you hopefully build a much more adequate and reliable national grid. So it makes a lot of sense.
And I agree with you on that. I mean, you can't imagine being in a laboratory and then light goes off. You do not have the power to, to power up your equipment and continue your research. But in terms of just reducing dependence on a national grid and the overall health status of that national grid, what does this mean?
Well, again, I mean, if you develop off-grid solutions to the extent that you can, reduce some load for the national grid, it simply means that the remaining power would serve those who are tied to the grid better. But again, this should not in any way reduce investment in expanding the grid. I mean, a country like Nigeria with a very large development ambition, we really need to close the development gap in terms of economic development. We need to be growing at a larger GDP, and of course, population is high, growing. It's estimated that maybe in the next decade or so, we might be one of the largest countries by population in the world because we have a high rate of birth. We have a high rate of birth, and we have declining death rates, which means we have net gain with population. So what that means, therefore, is that we need to invest in our grid, expand it, make it more efficient, so that this does not become, crowds out investment in the grid itself. This should be seen properly as an intervention to realism that we can't fix the grid in a couple of years in the way we want. We need to work on the grid, keep improving the grid incrementally, but at the same time, we need to provide quick power to these critical centers. And so what we're going to see is that with these centers having to depend less on the national grid, outages will not affect them much, but at the same time, the savings in terms of megawatts that come from that would then mean that it can be redistributed back to customers who themselves are on the grid. But my sense is that, look, these savings will not be enough for national grid. Is to save those institutions while we keep on investing in the national grid as we have the physical space to do so. But in the meantime, this is a smart move to help these sectors get reliable electricity and get involved in production. Look, it's clear that lack of adequate and reliable electricity has a big contribution to constraining GDP growth. That was evident all over the world. If you have better access to electricity per capita for citizens, for homes, for businesses, for SMEs, and for such institutions, we will probably be growing with +2 or so digit in GDP growth. So that's what it is. It's a supplementation, not a replacement or displacement to investment and effective work on the grid, because the grid energy is critical for development. We have to expand our grid to even up to 30,000 megawatts available and supplied to homes and businesses to keep pace with our development aspirations and our population growth and urbanization, which is fast in Nigeria.
And interesting you mentioned that, because some of the concerns that I have heard from Nigerians, whether in person or on social media, is that, look, if you take out all government institutions from the national grid, what then is the incentive to actually fix the national grid? But I'll come back to that national grid in just a moment. I wanted to take a comment from the minister when he said that these institutions have faced severe electricity challenges leading to blackouts and industrial actions as they struggle to meet exorbitant utility bills from distribution companies. I'm wondering, who should we hold responsible for that? I mean, you're talking about exorbitant utility bills. You're also talking about blackouts. That's almost like a shift of responsibility, do you think, Dr. Sam Amadi?
Yeah, I think, look, two things are happening here. If these institutions have exorbitant utility bill, two things are happening. One, either they're not paying their bills because they're not being financed as they ought to be financed, or they are getting their operational budget and not utilizing it well, or the distribution companies are fleecing them, overcharging them. So everything comes back to the Ministry of Power's decks. So one, they're not properly, they're overbilling them. Secondly, or the cost recovery, the discos are not able to collect their money because these entities are not paying. So but at the level of availability, which is what we should focus on here, is that they probably don't have enough power. Probably they're going to spend more with generator. And because we're not funding these institutions well, I've done some research at Abuja School. The level of financing for research institutions in this country has been low for a long time. Why? Because the way we run an economy as an extractive industry oriented, our economy is largely built around extraction. We have not yet moved into even the manufacturing industrial base, and then moving into service sector. And that's where the product of research fits into manufacturing industry. So you will see a link between business and epistemic communities, whether private or public research institutions. And because we've not had this visibility for research and we've not valued much, perhaps if you look at national budget, the sectoral allocations to either education or any sector, if you look at it, if you subdivide it or disaggregate it, what goes to this research institution is not good enough in terms of maybe not just capital budget, but also operational costs to run those places. So that's one issue. With this power, government to contract, pay for, build, the argument will not be that the power perhaps will have cheaper in the short term. You also need to find a way of sustaining the maintenance of this solar. Renewable energy is expensive per unit, but if government pays the cost, then there's need for finding a formula that guarantees sustainability, financial sustainability, whether the user pay, they're going to be paying regularly to make sure that the operators, depending on PPP arrangement, whoever is going to provide and maintain these power systems, are able to continuously upgrade, continuously maintain them so that we don't move to a period where we have power, then this system collapses. So this calls for a lot of planning and structuring. But I think that the fact that we have not been funding our research institutions, the fact that the funds made for operational costs are not being used to pay for NEPA bill, explain largely why they have these so-called high bills. At the same time, high bills, still no power available. So it tells the story of how the sector is, and what needs to be done to ensure that not just that they will pay the right tariffs, but also, more importantly, that people have regular supply. And so if they have regular supply, then they will not spend more provided through generator and other form of self-provision, which is still more expensive than grid energy. With the band A Hopeland, it's still more expensive to diesel yourself, to provide your own power through diesel generator or through petrol generator. You are still paying more. So with more affordable, more available power to research institutions, they're going to spend less in terms of overall OPEX, operational maintenance costs. So I think the blame still lies back to the sector. That they're not doing enough to provide either the funding or provide power at an affordable rate. Again, normal tariffing. Institutions or public institutions do not pay as much as businesses and private homes. So ironically, they pay more here, which is not good. They're supposed to be cross-subsidized so that consumers actually pay more. Businesses pay less because of the fact that government wants them to have low production costs in order to be competitive and produce more. And what they produce help to create employment, and revenue for both the private and public sector. But here in Nigeria, I think because businesses are easy to be targeted, they pay more.
And I like that you said, I want to stay on that point, because you mentioned the band A, just that band system. And people have said, look, it's quite faulty. And that businesses, highbrow businesses are targeted. And so they become the band A and they get to pay more. And some of them have asked to be removed. And these discos have refused to remove them from the, and I think it was the UCH in Ibadan that had that exorbitant bill challenge recently. I was asking to be removed from band A, and they told them they cannot be removed from band A.
I think that, when the ban came up, I had a meeting with people in NEC, and I told them, I understand fiscal crisis facing the government. The government had to deal with fiscal challenges, the debts, and then devaluation meant that if your debt was 10 billion and you devalue your currency because of other fiscal policy, and monetary policy, your debt is now times maybe 3 or 4. So this is what happened. The band A probably was a way to reduce the physical burden of the sector, but it didn't make much sense from a regulatory point of view. First, it excluded people from consumption, allocate arbitrarily. Some people have 20 megawatt, 20 hours, some have less. No, the way market works is that if you can afford to pay, you consume as much as you want. Number two, like I said, if you're going to be charging the productive sector more, then you're providing disincentive for productivity. You are making the business more expensive, and you are transmitting also higher prices to those customers you want to protect. So I thought it didn't make much sense. And then national institutions like hospitals and healthcare and universities are usually placed on what we call customer class A. They are special tariff. Why? Because they are public good they're producing, education. There's a positive externality. So it's not like those who work there are the ones who are beneficiaries alone. Not just the students. Society benefits when there's higher quality education. Society benefits when Medicare is better. And so the government has incentive to cross-subsidize them, give them a fairer tariff. So you can't carry a university and slam with the biggest tariff, because that's not good for public populace. So I think there's a right to complain. The problem with these markets are too much, gap in financing that oftentimes regulators and policymakers find it difficult to strike the right balance on public good and private good, to find a way to get in more money to the market without creating a disincentive for consumption. Because at the point, if the tariffs are too high for some businesses, they switch over to private production, because I mean, if the average tariff for Dangote supply himself is 30 naira per kilowatt, and you are doing 25, and you are unstable, then Dangote has incentive to move out of the grid and get into private production, because that's really, and then that creates, Dangote that subsidizes you creates a problem. So I think that we should be careful with the way we do this tariffing. Otherwise, you get to a point where people have incentive to migrate out of the grid, and that will worsen the outcome for those customers who are trapped, households who don't have the physical capability to migrate out of the grid entirely.
I mean, it shouldn't be cheaper to run on generator than it is to run on power from the grid. And right now, it's looking like it's cheaper to run on generator. But I also wanted to ask you, go ahead, you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, I said it's getting close, and that's dangerous. I agree with you.
So let's talk about regulation, because it looks like that's also a gap here. NEC seems to have been left in limbo, do you think, because of the decentralization of the electricity sector, because of the Electricity Act? Almost now like they are wondering who is regulating. Is it the states? Is it NEC? Is that also a challenge when NEC doesn't know where it fits in anymore?
I think we, sometimes see this word, governance is critical. Look, the Electricity Act that President Tinubu signed into law is very important and should be stayed that way. States should be able to have the right to regulate themselves. But this is a problem. I think NEC and the ministry did not step up in leadership to provide guidance. What they should have done was to issue some directives and methodology for transition, so that states will not just jump onto the bandwagon. I've advised some states, and I've told them that, look, many states will fail because they don't quite understand how to leverage on the federal market and then divert, innovate, and create their own market, which becomes kind of an appendage of the national, but then you make critical and important revision. So what we're going to see, if NEC doesn't work hard and the ministry, is that we're going to see 36 markets that kind of diverge at central points. So for example, we are still receiving load from a central dispatch. Meaning, if you're Enugu Disco, for example, and you have main power as a disco, subsidiary of Enugu Disco, but your power is coming from a central dispatch on a PPA that has been closed for 25 years. So you can't just come and create your own wholesale price. You have to grandfather all those assets and contracts that the federal government has done. So they will operate in a jurisdiction. And that means somebody should be overseen and see there's a convergence of the electricity markets in critical areas. So yes, it's good that we are decentralizing. It helps us to innovate. So Lagos can be moving at 30% innovation, Kano can be coming at 10 and learning, experimenting. That's good, but you have to create a central coordination that is smart enough to make sure that no state diverts too far away. It creates a crisis and then mainstream fiscal crisis back to the center. So my fear is that the way we're moving now, we are going to face a lot of headwinds, threats that could have avoided if we had somebody carefully, frameworking, carefully outlining processes in which we have major convergence and very smart divergence. But right now, you might have too many divergence, and then it will hurt because the federal government still have responsibility to show that everybody has that Nigeria grid works, even as states are working hard. So I want to see more of leadership at the center, kind of hand-holding. Because these states have no capacity so much. Somebody should be able to handhold them so that they make important innovation and diversion, but at the same time, they do not, enforce back crisis and fragility to the national grid. And that will happen.
Dr. Amadi, almost like what we have in the aviation sector, where you can own your airline as a state, but regulation comes from, the center. You have FAN, you have the NCAA, the Ministry of Aviation and Aerospace is there. They control everything that happens with these airlines. But perhaps that's what the Ministry of Power should have, at least, look, let's, like you mentioned, take that leadership to say, this is what we want in terms of the Electricity Act. Absolutely.
So there should be some 3 to 4 years of grandfathering, the grandfather sector, allow people to innovate, they create their own market, but their markets are aligned. So, for example, NEC should not be an interstate regulator. Secondly, based on TCN being a common service for now, until states are able to construct, I don't see many states having the physical capacity to construct their own transmission. So, being that, you have to provide guidance on how the common services can manage. And then look at generators. Our generators are multi-state. Before states start creating their own generating power plants, which is okay. But for now, they're going to have central load. How do you create Enugu electricity market with a central national electricity market? What are the intersections and what protocols, rules will guide those intersections? And through the governance forum, everybody will buy it in, so that there will be in every law, you make sure that those protocols are well, represented in common features will be in every law. Even as states, diverge in how much of renewable energy are we going to have, rural electrification agency, how much are we going to have, how independent will be our NEC. Those things are issues that states can diverge, but there will be core issues that states have to converge compulsorily in order to ensure that as states are developing capacity, Nigeria's national grid capacity is growing and there's harmony and coherence in the whole, because this is a national market. Interestingly, we run a national economy with 36 sub-legal jurisdictions. If you're not careful, those jurisdictions will undermine the national economy. We don't still have state economies. We have mostly a national economy where we share allocation every month at the federal level, and therefore you have to be careful to create, like the Chinese do. We call it, controlled decentralization. People manage themselves, but there's a sense in which there's logical coherence. They're not controlling by forceful or self-serving, but it's a control based on logical instruments, based on rules, based on concepts and ideas that each person uses to manage their own divergence. So I agree with you that something close, not as much as aviation, where you have central, regulator, but at least something that you have protocols, codes that are well defined, that are common, and then you have different laws. So anybody who goes to Enugu market will see some difference with Lagos market. But they will also know that if you are a supplier in Lagos, you can easily drop power in Enugu. You can also build a power plant knowing that you're not going to serve only Ekiti, a small state. You can also serve the whole of Western Nigeria because it makes more economic sense to have that regional scale. So those are some of the changes that we should bring in now so that we don't disrupt or destroy the sector as we move on.
I could have this conversation with you on and on. Clearly, this was your sector and quite knowledgeable in that area. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Sam Amadi.
Thank you so much.